is your host, Benjamin Saxton, and welcome to a Fighter's Chance podcast, where we give people in the combat sports world an opportunity to talk about the things worth fighting for. Today's guest is considered by some to be the pioneer of Australian MMA, won the first ever Australian MMA title, first Australian to fight in an MMA match in K1, first Australian to fight for a UFC World Championship, owner of King's Academy, fight analyst on UFC Fight Week on Fox Sports, Elvis Sinosic. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. As I say, good to be the king. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure talking with you today, and it's Friday your time. How's you getting?
You'll be glad to know we've survived COVID so far.
Oh, very good. And where are you at right now? So tell the viewers where you're at right now.
Well, so I'm in Sydney, Australia. That's where I'm based. I'm currently in my academy. You can see the ring and in the background, the cage down there, King's Academy of Martial Arts. As you mentioned earlier, I'm a pioneer of Australian mixed martial arts. I competed and won the first Pan-Pacific Championships. I represented Australia at the first ever ADCC inaugural World Submission Wrestling Championships. I actually did the first ever heel hook in ADCC competition. Fought in the first ever MMA event here in Australia. Won the first ever Australian heavyweight MMA title. Back then it was known as Valet Tudo, which is anything goes. First Australian to compete in the UFC. First Australian to fight for a world title. With the UFC, I fought in the first event in London and Manchester. So obviously doing a lot there. And I opened the first MMA super gym here in Australia as well, incorporating Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, kickboxing, wrestling, and MMA. But more importantly, a lot of the stuff I took from the US while I traveled there was also recovery. So we have an ice bath, a sauna, a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, as well as hot yoga room. So it's all about a holistic kind of approach to training, because I think a lot of places miss the recovery part, and I think that's equally as important as the actual training. And again, I'm sure we'll get through to it. That'll come up a lot when we discuss the history and the steps I took pioneering this sport here in Australia and throughout the world.
Yeah, and I think that's a good transition because, I mean, just listening to you over the last like 30 seconds, you hear a lot of firsts. You know, you were the first one to trailblaze and accomplish a lot of things. So just listening to what you said, you know, there's a lot of firsts. You're the first to accomplish so many things, and that list goes on. So let's kind of start. I'd like to kind of start in your history of kind of what drove you to mixed martial arts. And then as you started accomplishing these things, you know, the first to do this, the first to do that, were you aware, like, were you thinking about that? Like, I'm the first to be doing this at the time, or did you reflect on that after you had accomplished that?
So I'll answer that first, and then I'll go into what kind of got me started and on the journey and a little bit about that journey. No, I mean, it was never about being the first and doing the first. I mean, it did kind of affect my decision to get into the sport, but not so much about being the first. But when I get into the story, you'll understand it. At the time, it was just about doing it. I just wanted to get out there and do it. I wasn't really thinking about the fact that no one else had done it before. It's only kind of in retrospect that I kind of look back, and then, you know, when I do podcasts and interviews like this where people start talking about it and asking questions, it kind of makes me realize that, oh, wow, you know, I was the first, and, you know, it wasn't really being done before. And obviously now I'm well aware of it because, you know, I've been in the sport for a long time. I've been talking about it for a long time. And as you mentioned, you know, on Fox Sports and commentating and analyzing events. So in retrospect, yeah, it's an amazing thing. But at the time, it was just a journey. It was just going out there and doing it. As a young kid, so I'll get into a bit of the history and how I got into it. I was your fairly normal child, thin, not really special. Obviously from overseas background, back then were known as WOGs and things like that. So, I used to get picked on a little bit at school. Nothing, anything more than any other kid would. I was a little bit nerdy. I was quite intellectual. And, obviously that has carried across into my MMA career as well. And because of obviously the more intellectual kids get picked on by the more athletic kids, I wasn't unathletic, but I wasn't particularly athletic either. So I kind of discovered Bruce Lee and his movies and then some of his books. And so I became a big fan of Bruce Lee, and that kind of drove me to want to do martial arts. And so at my local school, the only martial art available was a judo class. So, as far as I was concerned, I was a young child. Martial arts is martial arts. So I jumped into the judo program. Interestingly enough, and years later, it would come back to me. But at the time, I wasn't very much a big fan of all the throws and takedowns, but I really enjoyed the grappling aspect of it. I found as a lanky child, I struggled with the throws, getting my center of gravity under my training partners and my opponents. But when I hit the ground, I was like a snake or an anaconda, as a term is known in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I was able to wrap people up, and I quite enjoyed that at the time. I did judo for a few years, got deep into more about martial arts. And then when I got myself a driver's license, I was able to start choosing what I did. And I kind of stopped the judo and I went into Taekwondo. Because at the time, it was the only thing around, and it was being advertised as Korean Kung Fu. And I'm like, well, Bruce Lee did Kung Fu. This is a Korean Kung Fu. And not being overly aware of the differences as a child, it was a punching and kicking style with the flashy stuff, which, Bruce did. So I took to it. And again, it was one of the more old school styles of Taekwondo where there was a lot of contact. Obviously, still like today, we didn't have gloves or anything, so it was bare fist. So it was meant to be limited contact to the face. But, when I got my black belt there, we were still punching each other in the face and kicking each other in the head with no shin pads and stuff like that. And then, I did that. And then when I kind of got to university, I kind of stopped it just because I didn't have the time with study. And what I ended up doing was with some friends is during our lunch times, we'd play a different sport every month or two. So we'd pick a sport, we just focus on it. So we just use it as a kind of a recreational break, but also to just mentally clear our minds from study. Because, putting a lot of study in, I did IT, a lot of hours. And I just found very early on that it was important to exercise, that the days I didn't exercise, my mental capacity was actually affected. And again, that comes down to why I kind of stuck with the martial arts and how it's a lifetime long activity. But at the time, I was playing different sports, and we played soccer and cricket and football and tennis and badminton, and we started playing volleyball. And I kind of quite got into the volleyball. I enjoyed it. Again, tall, lanky kid. I had a good vertical leap, so I ended up going and playing social volleyball, which got me into the social league. And then one of the state league reps was scouting. He saw me there. He goes, look, you've got a lot of potential. Come down to the club. So I ended up playing state league volleyball, which then got me introduced to beach volleyball, which is the Schitznitz. So that was pretty cool. I was living in Canberra back then. So now I'm up in Sydney. So Canberra is the capital of Australia. Sydney is the capital of New South Wales. So I ended up traveling to Sydney to compete in volleyball. And then during that time, through the Blitz magazine, I discovered Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Gracie Jiu-Jitsu through John Will Machado Jiu-Jitsu here in Australia. Again, back in the day, he was a bit of a pioneer. He was actually the MMA before it was MMA, because he believed in cross-training. He'd been to the Philippines and trained in Salat, wrestling pits of India, and obviously went to Brazil and discovered Jiu-Jitsu, which was actually because a Brazilian had come over to Australia, and in the local magazines, he'd put out a $50,000 challenge, fight me, winner takes, you both put up 50,000, winner takes it all. And he's like, well, he's keen to give this a go, but he was like, I might find out a bit more about this martial art that he does before I do. And thankfully he did. He saved himself $50,000. But again, he owned Blitz magazine, so he started writing about it. So I discovered the Gracies. And so living in Canberra, I had this desire to learn jiu-jitsu, and the only place nearby was Sydney where there was a club, and my future coach, Anthony Lange, ran a club up there. I was playing beach volleyball in Canberra. There was no beach courts, just sand courts at the pool. So another reason to move up to Sydney because they had beaches there. And I was doing IT, and there's a lot of big companies here. So I used the opportunity, applied to Microsoft, got a job at Microsoft, moved up to Sydney, started playing beach volleyball, and then started training with Anthony Lange, who was, pretty much the premier jiu-jitsu guy in Sydney, one of John Will's students. And that kind of got me going into the jiu-jitsu, and then that's kind of where I discovered the mixed martial arts previously when one of my workmates at one of my early jobs had given me a tape of UFC 2 where, Royce Gracie choked out all these muscled up guys and everything. So I was quite keen about the MMA. Well, back then was known as no holds barred. I was interested in the jiu-jitsu.
At what point were you, intellect, you stop, you stop training, you get a good job with Microsoft, you're playing volleyball, you're still training jiu-jitsu. At what point you're like, maybe stop doing the corporate America job and start fully focusing on martial arts?
Well, that actually took quite a while. So as I mentioned, I discovered the jiu-jitsu when I was in Canberra, and I got the UFC 2 tapes, and that's kind of what motivated me to move up to Sydney. Discovered the jiu-jitsu, and then in the the Blitz magazine, there was an ad, UFC coming to Australia. I'd already watched some of the events through tape trading, the old VHS tapes that traveled around the world, and we swapped instructionals for fight shows and things like that. So I saw this ad and I wanted to compete in it. So, I registered my interest. I was really a nobody at the time. So the promoter's like, yeah, look, we'll put you on our waiting list. We've got a lot of big names ahead of you. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I pretty much called him every day until about 2 weeks, 10 days before the event. Most of the names had pulled out once they'd kind of discovered what was really involved in it. An opportunity came up. So I jumped in, fought in the first ever event in Australia. Back then it was called UFC Australasia until they got sued by SCG for using the name. And then when it was released on VHS, and if you Google it, you'll look up Caged Combat 1, which is what it ended up getting called. So I did that for a while. And then while doing that, I was also playing pro beach volleyball, working full-time in IT, and then, trying to have a relationship. And it was a killer, honestly. It was just trying to do so much and trying to do strength and conditioning, and then striking and grappling, and then beach volleyball. And I kind of got to a point where I kind of went, in the volleyball, I was a late starter. So there was a lot of young guys who'd started at 8 years old, and they'd been coming up through school playing indoor volleyball, and they'd come onto the courts. They were also, 18, 19, hitting the pro beach circuit, where I was, mid-20s. And I didn't start until I was almost in my 20s. So I was kind of behind the 8 ball. So I was actually in the pros for here in Australia, but I was at the bottom end of the pros. I'd win some matches and stuff. Never really got to event. I think I got close to some some finals and stuff a few times in the events. But it was always going to be a struggle. Then here I was in this new sport, mixed martial, no holds barred. And it was kind of relatively new. And at the time, I had to sit down with myself, because there wasn't really anyone to really talk about it. And I said to myself, look, which is going to give me a better career opportunity? I've got this sport, which is just evolving. It's fairly new. And again, I wasn't thinking about pioneering. I was just thinking about opportunities.
Right.
And then I've got this other sport which has been around for years. There's lots of talent already in the sport. There's lots of people who've been doing it for years coming up behind me. And I'm always going to be at most middle of the pack. I might get lucky and work my way up, but it's always going to be difficult from where I started, where even though I was older starting the mixed martial arts or the no holds barred, there wasn't a lot of people doing it. So I had the opportunity of kind of getting in there early. And even though the no holds barred mixed martial arts was new. I'd still been doing martial arts for a long time. So I'd actually started martial arts when I was about 8 or 9. So I was still in my blood and I was very familiar with it, even though I wasn't familiar as much with the combat side of it. And I kind of went, you know what, I'm going to pick one or the other. And I ended up choosing the martial arts and focusing on that. It dried up for a couple of years in Australia just because the difficulty of getting from Australia to the rest of the world. And then I'm sure we'll get into it. Opportunities arose. I ended up started going overseas and competing. I did that for a couple of years. And it kind of reached a point where it wasn't even because of fighting. It was more just I got an opportunity to be part of a full-time gym and start teaching. And obviously, the fighting would have been easier when you're a full-time martial arts coach. So it was more that kind of inspired me to kind of drop the corporate side of it rather than the fighting. It's a little bit different now because back then you just couldn't make a living fighting. It just wasn't possible. Well, at least not here in Australia. You know, I think in the US it was kind of some guys were going full-time as fighters and stuff. But I think even now today, there are still people that, you know, hold part-time jobs and stuff.
Let me ask you a question. So, you know, back then when you mentioned no holds barred, right? You know, it really was no rules, like not what we see today, you know, on ESPN or Fox. You know, it's sanctioned. You have a referee in there. There was a referee, but you know, there really was no rules. So when you're balancing the corporate America job and you got that no holds barred and you're dealing with injuries and you come in with a black eye maybe or whatever, you know, how was that, you know, dealing with both sides of the world? Or, you know,
it was actually kind of interesting. Thankfully, I didn't have too many injuries. I didn't turn up with too many obviously after fights, I always did. But my employers were aware of what was going on. And look, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, it was difficult at times because I worked help desk where I was like first point of contact. But no, it was considering how non-mainstream it was and how unaware. I was fairly well received by my employers.
Good.
You know, my direct management were pretty good. It was kind of funny because I had this. Obviously, when I fought Tito for the world title, for the light heavyweight world title, we got a poster and everything. So I actually ended up, just as a joke, I put the poster up on my wall. And I wrote a quote to myself. It goes, "To Elvis, keep kicking ass. Congratulations, Elvis." Like, it was just like, and it was meant to, like, I just put it up for fun. And then, you know, we ended up having what was called a clean desk policy, where we got told we're not allowed to have personal items on. I think you're allowed to have one personal item up on your desk and no photos or posters up on the walls.
You might have been because of that rule. The rule might have been because of you.
No, I don't think so, because I refused to take my poster down. And I said, if anyone thinks I'm going to take it down, they can talk to me personally about it. No, I was kidding. Like, I had what am I going to do? If they come and say, you take it down or you're going to lose your job, I'm going to take it down because I need my job. But no, they just wouldn't talk. They would not confront me about it. And I just went, if they're not going to, I'm going to use it to my advantage.
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
It was kind of handy because obviously my employers knew that I was fighting. So whenever they had, and pretty much word got around the organization. Like, initially I was at Microsoft, and I ended up working at Qantas, and then I ended up going to Colonial State Bank. And the last part of my career was Coopers and Lybrand, which ended up merging with PwC. So that last part of my career, where I was doing a lot more fighting and going overseas, my boss knew about it, and I'd already appeared in the PwC, or the Coopers and Lybrand newsletter that goes around. So everyone knew there was this UFC fighter in the IT desk. So anytime they had help person, they'd send me up, because no one would argue with me. Like, even if they were in the right, they wouldn't argue with me. I'd just say, no, look, we'll sort it out. If you have a problem, come and see me. And no one ever had any problems. So, obviously we still resolve the problems, And, you know, we took our time. It's not like we made them wait or anything, but it was just funny that my boss would use me to send off the problem people because they knew no one would complain to me.
You're the muscle. You're the muscle.
And I think that's probably why I was allowed to keep my poster up when everyone else was getting to take. And the other staff would come up to me and I'm go, "Why have you got your poster up there?" And I go, "Who's going to tell me to take it down?" And they go, "Fair call." And then walk off.
It blows my mind. I know it was a different, you know, it's a different era of fighting, but nowadays to get to that level, I mean, you had the opportunity to fight for a championship in the UFC. You also had opportunities in different top tier organizations. And so, you know, fighters nowadays, you can't really get to that level without fully committing your entire life to training. Like you're working at your help desk and you're fighting in professional fights. Like you don't see that anymore. Like
actually, I was working full-time at a help desk. I did part-time security on the weekends.
Yeah.
I was teaching at my academy before I'd kind of gone full-time. I was training, and then I was trying to squeeze in a personal life. So, and even then when I was training, again, it's not like, as I mentioned before, here at Kings, we have everything in one place. Back then, it didn't exist. So I went to, at one point, I actually had to have multiple gym or club memberships because I did shift work and there were no gyms that were open both evening and night. It was either daytime classes or evening classes. Very few places had both. So I had a Muay Thai membership at an evening club. Then I had a Muay Thai membership for a place that trained during the day. Then I had a Jiu-Jitsu club membership for the evening. Then I had one which was kind of during the day. And then I had a gym membership. And then, so I was trying to do things like ride my bike to work so I could do conditioning. I would bring a skipping rope to work. During my lunch times, I'd skip in the car park. If I didn't have if it was raining or anything like that, I would run the stairs in the tower. So yeah, look, the amount that had to be, that's why when I hear people saying, look, it's too hard to succeed and blah, 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 I'm like, you just don't want it. Really, that's it. If you want it, you do whatever is necessary. Because when I look back at what I actually did and managed to do, now obviously it's a little bit different. I got a lot of opportunities just because of opportunities arose, and there, you know, and I was one of the people that would always step up for these opportunities, and because of that, my record reflects it. I don't have the greatest record in the world, but I faced the best guys on the planet at the time, the biggest names, the stars, and I've had the opportunity to travel the entire planet in competing. So when people say, "Look, it's too hard. I can't afford it. I can't. I haven't got the time," it's like, as far as I'm concerned, you just don't want it. Because as I said, I had like 5, 6 different memberships at one time. I was holding down 3 jobs if you include my teaching and running my academy, and then trying to have a personal life and seeing my family and doing the things that needed to get done. And I got it all done. And I kind of look back and, you know what, it wasn't that difficult. Like, it wasn't easy, but because I wanted it so bad, I made it happen. I made it work.
You got to be efficient with your time. I mean,
you've just got to. Again, one of the things I learned very often early was routine.
Right.
Is the mother of success. You create good habits, good routine, and then it's easy to do stuff that you don't want to do. If you make it a habit and a routine, you just get up, you do it. Right. Like riding to work, like running the stairs at lunchtime. I didn't want to run the stairs. I hated running. I hated doing cardio, but I made it such a routine that 3 days a week, my Monday, Wednesday, Friday was stairs. Tuesday, Thursday was my skipping. And then Fridays, I think I had off and I just go sit out in the sun or something like that. I ride my bike to and from work instead of catching public transport, because it meant I got 2 training sessions in, one before work, one after work. And it didn't really take any longer than it would have with public transport. It was probably actually a little bit faster when you consider peak hour in the afternoon. So again, it's just a matter of what you're willing to do to get what you're looking to achieve.
So, you know, anybody that knows you, knows your history, but for those that don't know you, I'm just going to rattle off some of the names because a lot of our viewers are viewers and fans of whether it's boxing or any other combat sports, mixed martial arts. I want to rattle off some of the names that you have fought in your professional career and just let that sink in. Ken Shamrock, Tito Ortiz, Michael Bisping.
Technically, that was Frank Shamrock, not Ken.
Frank Shamrock. Frank Shamrock. Tito Ortiz, Michael Bisping, Forrest Griffin. That is huge names, and they still their names are still just as large now as they were when they were fighting. And I want to ask you, among those names, who do you think maybe was the most intimidating, or maybe the biggest challenge for you when you actually fought them?
Look, probably Tito was probably one of the toughest. Like, he was probably hands down one of the strongest people that I'd faced in the cage. And I'd stepped up to guys who were 265 or 260, and Tito just felt another level above them. Obviously one of the most impressive was Frank. He really pushed my endurance and cardio. His pace it was different. That was an awesome opportunity. Renato Sobral, which Babalu, which back then was a massive name. Same thing. He was so well rounded. He really challenged me in all different aspects of the fighter. Same with some Frank. So some super talented guys. Forrest Griffin was amazing. He just also with Forrest, I actually trained with him afterwards, so I got to really appreciate his skills and abilities a lot more. Not so much from the fight, but more afterwards when I trained with him, and probably one of the hands down nicest guys I've ever met. And we became good friends after that. That's why I got the opportunity to kind of train with him. Bisping for his just amazing tenacity, drive, just unrelenting pace, and he's just one of those guys that wouldn't give up. I mean, we've seen it through his career fighting with one eye, fighting guys who obviously, I mean, he talks about guys on the gear. That was pretty much a given back in my day. It was like, I think everyone was nearly on the gear when I was fighting. We didn't even have a second thought about it. But also, same thing afterwards, I got to know Bisping, and I know a very brash personality as a fighter, but then behind the scenes, really nice guy, and we became friends as well. Quite interestingly, there are a lot of parallels. He was, pioneer for the UK. I was a pioneer for Australia. I ended up on Fox Sports. He ended up on Fox Sports, and a lot of similarities. The only difference is I fought for a world title. He won one. So damn you, Michael, you're one up on me.
There you go. No, I think that's fantastic. You mentioned your record, but just the ability, the ability to test yourself against those top tier competitors, and I think that's testament to hold your own and just to even get in the ring and compete at that high of a level. That's awesome. I want to kind of transition. So we've kind of talked about how you started and kind of some of your professional career. But I want to transition to now what you're doing. I mean, you have this beautiful cage behind you. Those on the podcast can't see it, but on the YouTube channel you can. It looks good.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And you got
the ring.
Nice.
Everything's branded. I'm not sure how well you can see.
Oh, perfect.
There. Again, one of the largest mat spaces around.
Yeah, so what I want to talk to you about now is I want to talk to you about King's Academy. What made you create it? You said it's super large. You also have the recovery center in there too. So kind of that mindset, that concept of incorporating everything together. So let's kind of talk about that, because it looks like a beautiful facility behind you. And let's talk about how you got that started.
Well, so as I mentioned earlier, I was running an academy back when I was still fighting and everything. So I got the opportunity with a friend. It was one of those things that when we're training, people talk about, it's like, I want to have my own gym one day. Yeah, I want to have my own gym. And we got the opportunity to start up one. So we had a gym we were training at. The head coach ended up leaving town, and initially it was just we were supposed to look after it while he was gone, and then he ended up not coming back. So we decided, we had a chat, and like, yeah, we'll take it over. It was just in a church hall, and we did that for about a year and a half, and then we're like, you know what, this is doing really well. We should kind of get out there and open up a full-time center. And I think we'll probably one of the first full-time MMA, probably the first MMA. I know there are other martial arts full-time centers, but I think we're the first full-time MMA center in Australia, and definitely in Sydney. So, you know, we opened up a full-time place. We did that for years, but it was in a small space, and, you know, we'd worked together for years. And then through the fight career, we kind of got to a point where with my business partner, we had different ideas on where we wanted to go and what we wanted to do. And obviously I wanted to do a lot more and a lot bigger, which obviously meant a lot more financial investment, and my business partner not so much at the time. So we kind of, for various reasons, we had different ideas. We went separate ways. At the time, we had 2 different locations, so we took over one each. He took one location, I took the other location, and then I took that over, and the location I took over was actually struggling. The other one was our head center, and it was already doing fantastic, already pumping. Because it was our head one, we put more energy into it. Even though we were both kind of coming out to the second place, I don't think we put in the same amount of energy as we did in the head center. And so when I took over, obviously I put all my energy into it, and within 6 months I turned it around, and it was just as successful as our original head center. And then we started having issues with filling up the place, and then like it was getting too full. So I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, you know what? I've always wanted to do a proper full-time academy. I'd been overseas. I trained in Vegas at a couple of, as I mentioned, I trained with Forrest, Robert Drysdale down there. I knew Frank Mir, and I'd been to a couple of places he trained at. I knew Randy. I'd known Randy for a long time, Randy Couture. So I'd been obviously to Team Couture, seen what they'd had there. And I think it was a tap out center, and there's a couple of other places. So I'd kind of seen what was there, and they all did things kind of similar, but a little bit differently. And I just felt I could take all that, put it together, and just create our own Australian version. I think we needed a full-time MMA center. There just was none out here. I mean, as I said, we kind of did it. We had a full-time center, and we did jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, and MMA, and that's really about it. We had a small ring in there. So I started looking for warehouses and things like that, and I found this, and I'm like, okay. So I had this massive vision. But also, as I mentioned, intellect drove me a lot when I was younger and through my career. You know, I was in IT. I have a very structured type approach to things, and I realized the importance of branding and things like that. So I put a lot of thought into, I mean, as you can see, everything's kind of black and yellow, you know, because my fight colors were black and gold. So I thought that would be something that would stand out a little bit more than a lot of the traditional gyms were black and red, black and gray,
right?
Red and blue, you know, all your standard kind of colors. So there were some jiu-jitsu gyms that were white only, but they tend to be jiu-jitsu only. And I felt the black and gold was a good representation of me. It stood out. I mean, if you just check out, I'm not sure if you can see the wall.
Nice.
So, you know, a big wall with the lion's eye, because obviously the lion is the king of the jungle. So it was a big part of my branding as well, the black and gold.
Well,
so I kind of realized I needed to approach it holistically, not just bits and pieces. So it was a combination of looking at the classes. So getting in boxing coaches, wrestling coaches, training up my Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu coaches, raising my own fighters, and then obviously the branding, the color scheme, the logo, getting all that, uniforms. So that works. And for the people that run their gyms, ensuring that my social media, my website, and the actual academy all have the same feel, because you don't want people who see something artificial on a website or social
Right.
media, but they come in and it's not the same thing. I wanted that same feel across all the platforms. So there's no, the surprises that they get when they come in are more surprises of awe, not disappointment.
That's good.
And then obviously, because of the importance of recovery, and, you know, I'd already been thinking about it. I'd already kind of stopped fighting for a few years. CTE was, you know, something that was coming up a lot. And so I'd already been doing a lot of research into nutrition, into supplementation, ensuring that I don't have any cognitive decline as I continue to age. So I wanted to ensure the facility had those features available to my fighters. Whether they use them or not, it's up to them, but I thought it was important. So that, again, that's why we have the ice bath, the sauna, the hyperbaric oxygen. We supply good quality products, oxygen water, beta hydroxybutyrate, BCAAs, so things for recovery, various different elements. So everything comes together in a complete package. That was kind of my vision. And it's kind of funny because I talked to the staff a year or two after, you know, we're doing, everything's fantastic, they're looking great. And they said, we'll be honest, when you first brought us into this warehouse and we saw what was here, we're like, there's no way he can do it. We don't understand. Like they thought I'd made a mistake. And then how it's turned out, it's like my vision has come to fruition, and it's just blowing up.
Well, if you build it, they will come. You know, there's a famous movie like that, Field of Dreams. And I find it fascinating that, you know, with your experience, your professional side, making those connections with some of those top tier fighters and seeing those gyms all around the world, you know, traveling and seeing those and then incorporating them, you know, what works here, what works there, bringing it all to Australia, bringing it all to your home, building it out, and then putting your own flair on it. I mean, because that's ultimately, you know, what you got to do. And it sounds amazing.
Yeah, no, as I said, absolutely fantastic. And again, you know, a lot of luck. I just happened to be around at the right time. And but saying that, you know, I took advantage of all my opportunities. Opportunities were laid in front of me, and not all of them worked out, but I jumped on all of them. I mean, I'm not sure if we mentioned earlier, UFC Gym obviously came to Australia. They have a franchise system. I'm actually the head of the UFC Gym Australia BJJ program. So I oversee their technical development for their jiu-jitsu. I am actually a franchisee. I'm in the process of opening my own UFC gym as well. It kind of made sense, you know, being the first Australian in the UFC, first Australian to fight for a UFC title. I was on Fox Sports, you know, one of the first Australians to be talking about UFC on TV. So it made sense when the UFC gym franchise came out to Australia that I'd be involved with it. I would help build the brand as well. And I don't use it as a competition to what I do here. I'd use it more as a balance, because obviously what we have here is really about introducing jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, wrestling, MMA to the people who are looking for it. The UFC gym is really more about introducing it to the people who are not aware of it, giving them the opportunity to discover jiu-jitsu and boxing and kickboxing and wrestling, and use it for their health. You know, I mean, the motto is train different, and it's about training like a fighter without having to be a fighter. Obviously, their programs have now developed, and obviously with my input, it's also helped. We do have, you know, a proper competition team. We do have, you know, fighters and things like that fighting out of UFC gym. But initially for me, it was all about introducing the benefits that I personally have experienced. I wouldn't be where I am today without my fighting, without my martial arts. As I said, it taught me a lot of tenacity, determination. It taught me about routine, the importance of the details, And it's because of that I've applied a lot of those principles into my business, understanding how everything, when you look at an MMA fight with the grappling, the striking, the takedowns, the cage, they're all in different elements, but they don't work unless you can integrate them together. And I use those same principles with my business. It's great to have a fantastic looking gym, but if you don't have a good admin system, if you don't have good marketing, if you don't have good coaches, it's going to fall apart. But you need to have all those elements that integrate well together. And it's because of understanding that through MMA that I've been able to apply it here. And it's, you know, I have a beautiful house. I live on the water, a beautiful sun at the moment. And it's, all of this has come into place because, you know, martial arts has helped mold who I am. And I want to take that and mold the future generation that's coming up, future generation of not only fighters, but just healthy individuals that are valuable members of our community. Like, fighters are great, but they're far and few between. You know, fighting is not for everyone. I think for those that is here, it presents fantastic opportunities, and it is a great individual test, and that's kind of what inspired my initial journey. But it's the ability to help people that sometimes don't feel that there's any help out there for them. The kids that come in with confidence issues or being bullied, to be able to turn that around, improve their confidence, have them protect themselves at school. I've had shy kids come in. I think we're probably the most successful school in Australia when it comes to juniors. We've produced 3 junior world champions.
Wow.
And there's a couple of our juniors that started with us, got their foundation from us, and because of various reasons have had to move away, have become world champions at other academies. But I believe it's that foundation that we provided to them that, you know, helped them to get there. And it's just seeing these kids come in shy and afraid of their own shadow, and then blossom into these wonderful kids who start doing well at school, start making friends, becoming very exuberant and healthy. Whether it's children or adults, having people who are, you know, overweight, unhealthy, unfit, they come in here, and, you know, regardless of where they are, we make them feel welcome. We make them feel like they're part of our community, because we know that the longer they're here with us, the more success they will see. I've had people come in, lose, 50 kilos, which is, in your terms, about 100 pounds, 120 pounds, turn their lives around and, go from being overweight to, being able to have children and getting married and being extremely happy and continuing, happy and healthy lives. So, there's a lot to it. And, it's more than people would realize. It's not just about the fighting. It's about providing skills for life.
That's awesome. That's great. Just a complete holistic view over everything that's just truly fantastic. I want to give you the opportunity to promote anything that you have going on outside of, we've talked a lot about King Academy, but if there's anything else that you want to bring up or talk about, I want to give you that opportunity now to promote that.
Look, the reality is nowadays pretty much all my time is other than family, of course, outside of family, most of my time is spent here at King's Academy, or as I said, the UFC gym. I am in the process of opening one up, and early next year I'll be opening up a UFC gym in Campbelltown, which is one of the outer suburbs of Sydney. It'll be one of the signature gyms, so it'll be an Elvis Sinosic UFC gym. Obviously as the first UFC fighter, it's a great opportunity to be able to do that. So I'm really excited about that, but that's still a while away. So pretty much all my time is spent here. It's helping people, getting on the mats, teaching jiu-jitsu and kickboxing, and building my programs, whether it's my hot yoga. Because I got a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, and the goal was to provide it to my fighters and students as an opportunity to improve endurance and recovery and just their general health for healthy individuals. But what's ended up happening is I'm getting a lot of unwell individuals, from cancer patients to autistic children. So I've been able to provide that and help them. So I do a lot of that. I've stopped my back. I try and give them as much information and knowledge, because I believe education and understanding are more important than just being given advice or steps to follow. And again, it's the same way I kind of teach is, you know, I teach skills, but I want people to understand why those skills work, how those skills work, so they are then able to develop their own skills. And because of that, I have some amazing competitors and coaches who've taken on that philosophy. But as I said, everything from the martial arts carries over, and I do that same thing with those people that come in, whether it's for the hot yoga or my hyperbaric oxygen chamber. I found that very rewarding, particularly seeing young autistic children or unwell children start to improve with the use of the facility. So when I first bought it, you know, obviously I had to keep it at a price because it was a higher purchase, so along with the branding company. But I thought it was just too much, and so I ended up buying it outright, and I just cut the prices by half just to make it more available. And I do always special for children. I go out of my way to look after them, and I give them special deals. I have an offer. If any children with cancer come in, they get free use of the chamber. I've tried to put the word out there, but sadly it's quite difficult getting that information kind of out there, because I've contacted charities and hospitals, and they're just not interested in passing it on. But I put that offer out, and because, you know, I want to be able to give back to the community as well, because obviously without the community here, I wouldn't be successful. I get the community keeps coming in. They love what they see here. The members keep recommending themselves to their friends and family, and more people come in. So we're being very successful, but I still want to be able to give back to the community as well.
I really do appreciate your story and this conversation. You know, so thank you again.
Been an absolute pleasure. Again, thank you very much for having me on. I probably should have warned you at the start that when I start talking, it's very hard to stop me. Thankfully, the CTE hasn't kicked in too much. I remember most of the old stories and what happened back in my past, so I'm kind of lucky in that regard. And the way I like to always finish and start with everything is, it's good to be the king.